Hello, welcome to the Inside the Birds NFL Week 18 preview show. I'm Geoff Mosher. That's right. Week 18, we have come to the final season, the final week of the regular season for the NFL. And the season always flies by quickly. I feel like that's the case. You know, you get to week 8 or week 9 and you feel like, holy cow, I can't believe the season's half over. And then the next thing comes Thanksgiving, then the holidays, the new year. And you look at the calendar, and here you are on the doorstep of the NFL postseason, but with still one very important final regular season left in the league year. And it's exactly what the NFL wanted. You do have a number one seed still available, and that's, of course, in the NFC. You have a handful of big games this weekend, which the NFL loves, which I think NFL viewers like. It makes the season exciting. Lions Vikings is obviously the headliner. That is a Sunday night game. The winner will win the NFC altogether and get the number one seed. The loser will be the fifth seed, have to go on the road in the playoffs. But there's also some wild card seeding still left to figure out there in the NFC. You've got the NFC South, obviously, that is also up for grabs between Tampa and Atlanta. And then, of course, in the AFC, you've got the AFC North still up for grabs going into the weekend between the Steelers and the Ravens, and some seeding still left to shake out in the AFC, including two teams that are on the outside that are hoping that things work out so that one of them can get in. So this is the kind of drama that the NFL loves. This is why they changed the playoff format a couple of years ago. They added the extra wild card team. You have more drama. Obviously, you have a two seed now that has to play in the first round, so it makes getting that number one seed even more important. I mean, that is vital now to get that number one seed. And of course, the Lions and Vikings will duke it out Sunday night in what should be a very exciting game. Look, I would not be surprised. I don't think anybody would be surprised if the Vikings won that game. The Lions have been reeling on defense for a while. They've lost so many players on defense. They're getting a few back. They may even get back Anzalone, the linebacker, for this game. That would help them a little bit. But the Lions have basically gotten by with all their injuries because they are elite offensively and they can outscore almost any team that they play, just like they did the other night against the 49ers in the night game. They win 40-34 against a pretty bad 49ers team. The week before, they scored 34 to beat the Bears. And they're fortunate that, you know, they were playing the Bears, who are not very good. So they, as long as they can put 30 to 40 on the board, which they seemingly do each week, 40 against the Niners, 34 against the Bears, 42 in a loss to the Bills, 34 in a win against the Packers. Those are just their last four games. As long as they can do that, they stand a chance to win any game they play until we get to the playoffs, and maybe they can get some more guys back on defense. But in this game against the Vikings, they're going up against a very good defense, maybe the best defense. I know the Eagles are the number one defense overall. You know, some of that is based on who you play. The Vikings have had a great defense all year long. I mean, they were really butchering the Packers last week. The Packers did mount a nice second half comeback, so they made the game close. It wound up being a good game, but you watch that first half and you could see the Vikings were frustrating the Packers offensively, frustrating Jordan Love offensively, and that's what Brian Flores has done. That's what this defense can do, and I think for the Lions to have to win, if the Lions are going to beat the Vikings, they're going to have to score upwards of 35 to 40, because the thing about the Vikings is while their defense is great, they have been on a scoring tear themselves as of lately. 27 against the Packers, who have a good defense, 27 against the Seahawks, 30 against the Bears, 42 against the Falcons. Don't look now. I don't know if everybody has realized this, but the Minnesota Vikings have won 9 games in a row. So that is a wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, 9. Just checking that out. They had a little 2 game losing streak where they lost week 7 and week 8 against the Lions and against the Rams. And since then, Darnold has played at an unbelievable level, and the Vikings have scored a lot of points. And you can absolutely make an argument that this Lions Vikings game is a matchup between the NFL's two best teams. You could also say that the Eagles, the Chiefs, you want to throw the Bills, maybe the Ravens in there, are all rightful to claim that they're the best team in the NFL, but you can't have this conversation without the Lions and the Vikings. So this could very well be uh, two teams duking it out, looking to get the number one seed and hoping to get into the Super Bowl and win it. They are both Super Bowl contenders without a doubt. So in the NFC, the number one seed still up for grabs there. The loser of that game will be the fifth seed and travel to the fourth seed. Probably be a favorite. I would think a lock to be a favorite, even though they're traveling in the first round. And they will play either the Tampa Bay Bucks or the Atlanta Falcons, whoever wins the NFC South. Right now, Tampa has the one game advantage. It is their seed, it is their NFC South to lose. They have a game against the Saints, whereas the Falcons will play the Panthers. So both teams should win those games. If that happens, the it doesn't matter. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers will win because they're one game up. I would expect that to happen. I believe both teams are at home, the Bucks and the Falcons. So as long as Tampa Bay takes care of business, they'll win. If they lose and the Falcons win, then the Falcons will be the fourth seed, and Tampa Bay will be out. The loser is out. In other words, if Atlanta doesn't win the NFC South, they're out of the playoffs. If Tampa doesn't win the NFC South, they're out of the playoffs. So one of those two is going to win the division, and the other one is going to be playing golf. And that's it for the NFC South. As of right now, the 6 and 7 seeds are the Commanders and the Packers, respectively. They can leapfrog if the Packers win and the Commanders lose. The Commanders will play in Dallas. They'll play the Cowboys. The Packers will play the Bears. I think logic would expect that both of those teams they're gonna play their starters, and both of them are playing teams that are out of it. So I would imagine that both the Packers and the Commanders will both win, and that will keep things as they currently are, which means that the Commanders would be the 6, the Packers would be the 7, and that would send the Packers on the road to Philadelphia in a first round matchup. Packers at Eagles in the first round. And for many, that might conjure some images of 2010, unfortunately, when the Packers came with Aaron Rodgers into the link and they left with a win. That game ended with Michael Vick trying to, come back and lead a hurry up offense and, making a big completion. If I remember, I can't recall who he threw the ball to, but they got the ball in Packers territory. Time was running out. Vick got everybody to the line of scrimmage. He quick snapped it. He tried to throw the ball to Riley Cooper in the end zone, and I believe he was intercepted to end that game. And then the Packers went on to win the Super Bowl despite having a truckload of injuries and getting even more injured and more banged up on the way to the Super Bowl, which they would wind up winning over Pittsburgh. They would have a ton of injuries, yet Aaron Rodgers just played out of his mind. And that's when Aaron Rodgers got his first Super Bowl. So I'm sure a lot of people would think about that game. Certainly myself, as sort of a historian, someone who's chronicled a lot of Eagles playoff games over the last 20 or so years. That game would jump out whenever you think of Packers, Eagles. You also think of 4th and 26 game where Donovan McNabb completes 4th and 26 to Freddie Mitchell, and the Eagles win that game, which was in Green Bay, if I recall, which, at this point in I start to, I forget. I don't remember everything. I wasn't yet on the Eagles beat when that game happened. I remember watching it, but I was not covering the team at the time. It wasn't Philadelphia because obviously the Eagles were the higher seed. They were the number one seed. The Packers were the fourth seed. It was on January 11th of the 2004 season. And yeah, the Eagles win on a field goal made possible by an unbelievable connection between Donovan and Fred X on 4th and 26. So there's a lot of Eagles Packers history there. and we will see what happens as the NFC shakes out. In the AFC, the Chiefs are the top seed. The Bills are the number two. That's set in stone. The Ravens can lock up the number three seed with a win over the Browns on Saturday. So the NFL obviously wanted the Ravens and the Steelers not playing at the same time with that up for grabs. They want everything, they want to know because the Steelers will still have something to play for even if the Ravens win. We'll talk about that in a second. But the Ravens can lock up the three seed with a win over the Browns. And wait till you hear what the line is on that game. We'll get into that a little bit later, but it is quite the spread if you're into the gambling element of it. Yeah, the Ravens can lock up the three seed with a win over the Browns. If the Ravens lose, that opens the door for the Steelers to take the three seed if they can beat the Bengals, who are red hot right now and trying to be one of those teams that prays for a couple of miracles to get in to the playoffs, have the seventh seed. They are alive. They're on life support and they need help, but it can happen. So the three seed will go to either the Ravens or the Steelers. The fourth seed is guaranteed to be the Texans as the winner of the AFC South. They look terrible. They just got pantsed last week by the Ravens. And I think a lot of people, myself included, expect the Houston Texans to be a one and done team here in the playoffs. They lost 31-2 on Christmas to the Ravens. They are not finishing the season in good form. So, and they haven't really looked good after the first 5 weeks of the season, but they will get the fourth seed. They'll play the fifth seed, which could be one of any number of teams. But I think no matter what, there will not be a lot of confidence that the Texans will be able to win their first round matchup, even at home. I mentioned the fifth seed. It most likely will be the Steelers. That's if the Ravens win and if the Steelers do beat the Bengals. They will get the fifth seed. Now, there is a chance that if the Steelers lose, if the Ravens win and the Steelers lose to the Broncos and the Chargers win over the Raiders, then the door's open for the Chargers to get the fifth seed and the Steelers to get the sixth seed. So still some reason there for the Chargers to want to play hard, the Steelers to want to play hard, the Bengals to want to play hard, the Broncos are going to want to play hard. And of course, the seventh seed could result in some drama here. It's the Broncos to lose. Now, Denver's going to play Kansas City, but Kansas City is starting Carson Wentz. They're going to play their backups. All right. But Denver isn't playing great football. If Denver beats the Chiefs, conversation's over. And they should. They're heavy favorites in that game, double-digit favorites. But you just never know. The NFL's weird that way. If Denver somehow loses to Kansas City's backups, they can still be the seventh seed. However, they would need both the Bengals and the Dolphins to lose. The Bengals play the Steelers. The Dolphins play the Jets. Now, this can happen. The Broncos can still lose and get in because the Bengals obviously have to beat the Steelers, and the Steelers have a lot to play for, and the Steelers are a good team. The Bengals haven't beaten too many really good teams this year. And the Dolphins will not have Tua. Can you imagine? I mean, they're preparing, I should say, the Dolphins are, as we speak right now, they're preparing to start Tyler Huntley. I cannot believe, with all that the Dolphins went through in losing Tua, that they've actually positioned themselves to get back into the playoff race and be eligible on the final week of the regular season to get into the playoffs. And can you imagine, if you're a Dolphins fan or a Dolphins player or coach, that given that this is a possibility, you are preparing for practice this week without your starting quarterback, Tua, once again. We've all seen how the Dolphins have played this year without Tua. It's not been pretty. So the fact that they are still technically alive, on life support, but still alive, but may not be able to get into the playoffs because they may not have their starting quarterback, is basically just the story of the season for the Miami Dolphins. That's really rough for them. They really need to do a lot of work this offseason to get better on the offensive line, get a little better on defense, because they can be a Super Bowl contender if they've got if they're able to keep Tua Tagovailoa healthy and get that offense back. But the offense, It's just not been the same. It's not been as explosive. They try to run the ball, they can't. Their offensive line's not good. But despite all that, it came down to week 18 and the Dolphins weren't technically eliminated. So they've got to go into the offseason with that mindset that they need to get better on the offensive line, need to get a little better on defense. They'll get some pass rushers back who are hurt this year. They also need a better backup quarterback. If they get a better backup quarterback, like a lot of teams invest, like the Eagles do, then maybe they'll have a shot if Tua gets hurt and misses 3, 4, 5 games or whatever to win some games and not completely have to bury themselves in a hole like they did this year. So that's the outlook for the Dolphins. I mentioned the Bengals. What the Bengals need is they've got they need the Broncos to lose to the Chiefs first and foremost. Also, they have to beat the Steelers, and then they need the Dolphins to lose to the Jets. So the in my mind, when you talk about teams for the seventh seed, the Broncos, the Bengals, the Dolphins, and I've said this for a couple of weeks now, as a fan of the game, an observer of the game, I would love to see the Bengals get the seventh seed, and then go to Buffalo in the first round. The way Joe Burrow is playing, the way Jamar Chase is playing, the way T. Higgins is playing. And the Bengals defense has started to play a little bit better here over the last few weeks. I mean, nothing great, and they still haven't beaten too many, good teams, but they've won four straight, beating the Cowboys, Titans, Browns, and they had a huge win over the Broncos last week. And when they absolutely had to have to stay alive. And what an unbelievable game that was. I mean, you saw Bo Nix throw an unbelievable touchdown in that game that you thought maybe would give that to Marvin Mims. It was the 51 yarder to Mims that tied it. Then Burrow runs one in to go up by a touchdown for the Bengals. Then Mims catches another one. It's a tie game, and then Higgins catches a 3-yard touchdown in overtime. What a back and forth game that was. And Joe Burrow was just unbelievable. 412 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Higgins goes for 131. Chase goes for 102. The Bengals have positioned themselves with this late run to make things really exciting. But unfortunately, they need too many things to happen. Do I think they can beat the Steelers? I do. I think they can beat the Steelers. Do I think the Jets can beat the Dolphins without Tua? Sure. Aaron Rodgers, maybe it's his last game and he wants to advertise himself out to somebody else in the league. Last game with the Jets? Sure. Can the Chiefs beat the Broncos? Well, that's the difficult one. It's the Chiefs' backups. Carson Wentz will be playing. Now, I think it's a rivalry game, so I definitely think the Chiefs are going to show up. They're going to be well coached. They still have talent. They still have some good players. I don't know who they're going to start on their offensive line, but their offensive line backups aren't very good because their offensive tackles who start aren't very good. But and Carson Wentz, we know, has held on to the ball for a while. But I'm curious to see how the coaching for Carson Wentz at this stage of his career, his sort of last shot here. He's been coached in the last 2 years by Andy Reid and then the year before by Sean McVay. Maybe that's mattered. Certainly a year with McVay, was it that obviously helped Sam Darnold out as he went to Minnesota and kind of emerged into an MVP candidate. He's not going to win MVP, but Sam Darnold has played at a really good level. So maybe we'll see if the same thing has happened here for I'm sorry. Sam Darnold was with Shanahan last year, not McVay. Wentz was with McVay last year. But two coaches who are very good, who are very known for being quarterback friendly, quarterback whisperers. So we'll see if there's anything left in Carson Wentz's tank. And you know that the Bengals will be wearing their Carson Wentz jerseys and hoping that the Chiefs can pull off the upset there and then leave it to the Bengals to take care of business against the Steelers and hope that the Jets do the same with the Dolphins. So that's what you got for the seventh seed. It's either going to be the Broncos, the Bengals, or the Dolphins. I think of those three teams, most people would love to see the Bengals get in. If not, the Broncos, the Dolphins without Tua. I mean, maybe he'd be able to be back for the playoffs, but the Dolphins have not been a fun team to watch this year. Had a few nice wins with Tua back. I know they beat the Rams in LA, but overall, I think the majority of NFL fans would love to see somehow the Bengals get into the playoffs and then match up against the Bills in the first round. The head coaching cycle will start as far as teams, hiring, firing. The Jets, the Bears, and the Saints are three teams that already made coaching changes throughout the year. I'm thinking that there will be at least six and possibly nine head coaching changes. I really don't think there'll be nine. I think a couple of guys who you're hearing might be gone, won't all be gone. Some of them will, some of them won't. But we know that the Saints, the Bears, and the Jets are all looking for head coaches. I expect the Jaguars to clean house, look for a head coach. That would be four. And then you've got five more teams: the Raiders with Pierce, the Cowboys with McCarthy, the Colts with Steichen, the Giants with Dable, and the Patriots with Mayo. I don't think all five are going to be replacing their head coaches, but I do think of that group, you will probably see two or three more. The Saints, I've said it before, I think Aaron Glenn makes the most sense. He's done a fantastic job with that Lions defense since he's gotten there. They've improved. They don't have always the best talent, but they are very, very clean schematically, and they have made the most of what they could this year with so many injuries. Aiden Hutchinson, Aleem McNeil, Carlton Davis. I mean, the list goes on and on. Now, Kirby Joseph has been fantastic for them, nine interceptions. So Aaron Glenn, he came over with Campbell from New Orleans. You know, they were there with Peyton. They're kind of considered Peyton Parcells type guys. So Aaron Glenn to me would make a lot of sense for the Saints, who already have some good defensive players, and they have an offensive coordinator in Clint Kubiak who was doing some really nice things early in the season. Everyone remembers the Saints were scoring 40 points a game and looked explosive, but then came the injuries to the offensive line, then came the injuries to the running back and the quarterback, then came the injuries on defense too, and just complete turmoil. I think that team needs a culture change, clearly. And I think Aaron Glenn being there, knowing the city, knowing how to build a program as he's helped Dan Campbell do in Detroit would make a lot of sense. As much sense as the Bears would make hiring Ben Johnson, the Lions offensive coordinator. Obviously, there's a lot of buzz there. It would make a lot of sense. They got the quarterback. They got some weapons. Ben Johnson is considered an offensive genius. He's done an unbelievable job with Jared Goff and that Lions offense. Not just how efficient it is, but how balanced it is. The trick plays that seem to work week after week after week. How often do you see trick plays work? As often as you've seen them work for the Detroit Lions. So they have really built foundationally a great offense there, and Ben Johnson has been the man behind the man. So you expect he will get a head coaching job. He's been interviewed before. He's been very picky about where he wants to go. But we'll see if he wants to go coach Caleb Williams and if the Bears want him there in the building. The Jets have already started interviewing. Ron Rivera was interviewed. I guess there were reports about Rex Ryan. I know they're also looking for a GM. They've talked to Lou Riddick. I don't know where the Jets are going to go, because with most franchises, you get a sense of what the owner likes, what the franchise typically looks for in a head coach. With the Jets, you don't even know who's running the franchise. It was Woody when they hired Joe Douglas, when they hired Robert Saleh. That was Chris Johnson, Woody's brother, because Woody was over in England as the ambassador under the Trump administration. Is he going to go back now that Trump is president again? Is he going to run the franchise? Because all the firings, the firing of Joe Douglas and the firing of Robert Saleh, were done by Woody. So who's calling the shots for the Jets? What are they looking for? Are they bringing Aaron Rodgers back? Does somebody want to come in and coach this team if Aaron Rodgers is back? There are so many questions. I imagine the Jets will cast a very wide net. They'll interview everybody under the sun. They'll hire a GM. They'll hire a coach, but then the ownership will get in the way. So who knows what's going to happen there. I'll say this for the Jets. They do have some talent. They've got some talent on the O-line. Finally, it's got to get better, but they have some talent. They've invested some draft picks in it, right? They've got some talent on the defense. It did not perform to expectation this year, but they also lost Jermaine Johnson. The Hassan Reddick thing didn't work out. Johnson will come back. Quinnen Williams, Sauce Gardner probably will play better under a better environment. Right now, it doesn't look good. He's had a bad year. but we know he's got some talent. The Jets have some talent. The running backs the Jets have, wide receivers the Jets have, they've got turmoil all over the place, but they have talent. So that's going to make some GM and some head coach think that together they can overcome the ownership deficiencies. The problem is that's what every GM and head coach have thought over the last few years. Some of them have been inept. Some of the GMs for the Jets, some of the coaches for the Jets have just been inept, whether it's an Adam Gase or a Mike McCagnon or John Idzik. Hopefully the Jets at least hire some guys with some chops. Uh, I imagine that they will, but they're going to have to fight through a whole lot. Jaguars, Doug Peterson is still there for now. I wouldn't be surprised if they clean house. It's another team, the owner wants to win. He stays away. That's why it's an attractive job. You don't hear Shad Khan stepping on toes or interfering or calling the shots like you hear with the Jets. All right, but I don't know what Shad Khan. He tried to go the college route with Urban Meyer, and that was a disaster. And it also showed that Shad Khan doesn't really have his finger on the pulse of the best coaching candidates, best GM candidates with Trent Baalke when he hired him. And there were better candidates out there. So it'll be interesting to see, does he clean house? Does he clean house of the GM? Does he clean house of the coaching staff? I imagine that if not one, then both will definitely go. And where does he go for a head coach? If he's learned his lesson, maybe he'll stay away from the college retread or the big college ego, and he'll stay away from the NFL retread in Doug Peterson, and he will try to get a younger coach. No, you don't have to be young. I don't want to. I don't want to be ageist here. Hopefully he will get a guy who he thinks can build a program. If that happens to be someone older, like Steve Spagnuolo, okay, who will probably deserves another chance to be a head coach, or Vance Joseph deserves the job he's done in Denver. Probably deserves another head coaching job. Cliff Kingsbury, a retread but a younger one. Cliff Kingsbury is a guy that you would have to think Shad Khan would look at and say, wow, did a nice job with Jay and Daniels. Can he do that for me here with my quarterback, Trevor Lawrence, with my blossoming wide receiver, Brian Thomas Jr.? Can he be the guy that uplifts my franchise? It's very possible. It would not shock me if Shad Khan went with that kind of offensive guy because he knows he's got Lawrence and he knows he's got Brian Thomas. Doesn't mean you can't go defense. Certainly, Washington did a great job in getting Dan Quinn and then hiring Cliff Kingsbury. Again, I have no idea what Shad Khan's going to do there. But the one thing is you don't have to worry about is he's not going to step on anybody's toes. He's going to let the coach coach and he's going to let the GM GM. So it'll be really interesting to see what he looks for and maybe if he tries to do a package deal type of deal with the head coach and the GM. So the four other teams that could possibly be five replacing their head coach, the Raiders with Pierce. I don't know if Mark Davis is going to do it. I think he knows that the Raiders need a quarterback, and it's sort of tough to evaluate Antonio Pierce this year when the Raiders have played two or three different quarterbacks, and two of them have been Aiden. Well, actually, three of them, right? And they've been Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell, and Desmond Ridder. You can't give a fair evaluation to a head coach on that. The defense hasn't been great, but there have been some games where the defense has shown you its potential. They obviously had a home run with Brock Bowers. They're going to have a top pick and get a quarterback. So what Mark Davis has to decide is, if I'm going to get a quarterback, do I need to get a new head coach who's more of an offensive-minded guy? Or can we have Antonio Pierce here? Can we stick with our coaching staff, get the quarterback, and then I will evaluate them on the following year? So we'll see what happens there. The Cowboys and McCarthy, I mean, the interesting thing is Mike McCarthy's contract expires, I think, January 14th. Jerry Jones is not getting any, he said that he's not getting any younger. He wants a win now guy. So I can't see Jerry Jones, if he's going to move on from McCarthy, hiring someone who has no resume or very little resume. For example, would he hire Liam Cohen, who just became the Tampa Bay Bucks offensive coordinator, has only been here for a year? He's coached in the NFL before, but as an offensive coordinator, he's done a great job with Baker Mayfield and the Bucks. But is that the guy Jerry Jones is going to look at and say, he's the missing piece? He's going to come in here and we're going to win championships. I don't see that. In fact, I think if he's going to make a move, it would be more like a Mike Vrabel, who Jerry would look at and say, this guy can come in here, reestablish a culture, but do it quickly and get this team back to a Super Bowl level in 2025. So I much more think that Jerry Jones would hire a guy like Vrabel, maybe a Spagnuolo, maybe a Brian Flores, than he would say a Liam Cohen or a Cliff Kingsbury or a Joe Brady or Christian Parker, the Eagles defensive backs coach, who I think will get some interviews. That's how I can see it with the Cowboys. The Colts are fascinating because I would have never thought that Shane Steichen would get fired after this year. But two things really stick out. One, Irsay has been very, very quiet. This is a guy that's usually always on social media. You're always hearing from him. He went into the year saying the Colts are going to be a team to be reckoned with. They're going to do something special. And you haven't heard anything from him. And he's impulsive. He is not a guy who sits there and compartmentalizes and figures it out. And, you know, he just, bam, he is impulsive and he will make changes on the fly. And he'll make interesting decisions that sort of scratch people's head. Like uh, when he fired Frank Reich, and then the next thing you know, Jeff Saturday is getting pulled off of his analyst chair and coaching the Indianapolis Colts for the last few weeks of the season. So I don't know what Irsay is going to do. But the second thing that sticks out is obviously, if you've seen it, I mean, Pat McAfee, a former Colt, lives in Indianapolis, has a very popular show on ESPN, appears to have inside information. He has destroyed the culture of the Indianapolis Colts. He has buried their work habits, not just any one person in particular. He's mentioned the quarterback. He's talked about the coach. He's talked about other players, but he has basically said the culture inside that building is unprofessional. And when asked to respond, Shane Steichen said, well, yeah, I think this happens with a lot of teams that aren't winning. And, being late to a meeting is, maybe not as big of a deal. It just didn't seem like a very defiant or confident Shane Steichen putting to rest these rumors. So if you're Irsay, right, Jim Irsay, you're looking at this and saying, I've got a team in discord. I got lack of professionalism being cited. I got a head coach who has not developed in year two the quarterback the way I was hoping he would develop him. And now I got a head coach who's sort of, but shrugging off some of these reports that are of a toxic environment. I'm not saying I think Shane Steichen should be fired, because I do agree with some of what he's saying, that when you lose, all the warts come out and it makes it look worse than it is. What I'm saying is Jim Irsay is somewhat of a loose cannon as an owner, and you have no idea what he's going to do. So I could absolutely see Irsay sitting there worried about the optics, worried about the PR, worried about what he's hearing about his own building, and saying, I got to make rash moves. Goodbye, Shane Steichen. Goodbye, Chris Ballard. I'm cleaning house. Who he would hire? Who knows? Who knows, because he's a wild card. But we'll have to see what happens there. Definitely a situation to keep your eye on. As far as the Giants, there's a lot of reports about Brian Daboll and Joe Shane not necessarily joined at the hip, even though they both came over from Buffalo. I don't know what to make of that. The Maras usually are patient. The Maras, John Mara believed that Daniel Jones was better than he was. He felt that Daniel Jones needed a chance. Daboll was clearly not a Daniel Jones guy. He tried to trade up in the draft, everybody knows, to get a quarterback. I think they had their eyes on May or Daniels. Either way, they weren't able to get it, and they had to bring back Daniel Jones. So you wonder if Daboll can convince Mara that they got to get a quarterback, his quarterback, and let him. You heard his comments after they won, after they incredibly beat the Colts, which was an embarrassing loss for the Colts that eliminated them, going back to the Colts saga. But Daboll said, hey, when you get good quarterback play, you win. So he's sending out the smoke signal. Give me a quarterback of my choosing and watch. I will win games. So we'll see if he gets the opportunity to do that. Something tells me one or the other way that both guys will not be back, Daboll and Joe Shane. So they may get a new GM, or maybe they keep the GM and get a new coach. I don't know. But I'd be surprised if both guys are definitely back. As for the Patriots, 2 weeks ago, they were competitive against the Bills. They were leading that game, I think, by halftime, definitely after the first quarter. And I remember saying on the show, just be competitive. Gerard Mayo, show the Patriots that you're fighting hard, your team's fighting for you. That week they did. Last week, not so much. They lose 40-7 to the Chargers. Now, I don't think the Crafts, Bob and Jonathan Kraft, hired Gerard Mayo and expected him to win games right away in year one. Are they evaluating him? Obviously. Are they frustrated? Obviously. Patriots look like they'll get the top pick. Don't need a quarterback, so they may be able to trade down and get a lot of influx of talent. They'll have a lot of money. What the Crafts need to decide, really, it's Bob Kraft. And we know his son Jonathan is very involved, but it's Bob Kraft's decision. Does he want to give Mayo another chance to build this team up, or does he want to bring back Mike Vrabel, former Patriots player who is a proven winner, who has been to an AFC championship game? Does he want that culture that Mike Vrabel can bring as sort of the next Belichick for him? Someone who's going to be a defensive minded coach, but really be more about culture and bring in good coaches and set a standard. All right. I think Vrabel, the standard he set will work well in New England. It would work well in Indianapolis, where clearly the culture has gone awry. It could work well in Dallas. It could work well anywhere. I think Mike Vrabel is going to get a job. It's just who wants that kind of guy, and what is the temptation that teams, all these teams I mentioned, will have to want to get the younger guy, someone who was coached for either Kevin O'Connell or Sean McVay or Mike Shanahan. I'm sorry, Kyle Shanahan, because those are the guys. We always make the joke, touched by Shanahan, touched by McVay. If one of these guys rubbed their shoulder on you or shook your hand in passing, all of a sudden you're a head coaching candidate. It's going to be a really interesting cycle. We'll see. We'll see if Cliff Kingsbury can get a second shot. We'll see if Joe Brady, the young kid from Buffalo, who's done a nice job as offensive coordinator, gets a couple interviews. I'm sure he will. Liam Cohen, I mentioned from the Bucks, Vance Joseph, Giro Evero. I mean, the Panthers have not been a team that you're really going to pluck from their coaching staff, but he was considered a good defensive mind. He's their defensive coordinator. Spagnuolo, I mentioned him. For Brian Flores, that's another guy. New England, right? Came from there. The Belichick tree. Helped them win a Super Bowl. Won 10 games, Brian Flores, as a Miami Dolphins head coach. Did it end poorly? Yes. Was there fallout with him and Tua? Yes. Has he rebounded really well going to the Steelers and then, of course, what he's done with the Vikings? Absolutely. The guy can coach. He can coach defense especially. All right. I don't know if he can come and put together a great staff. He has to be given that opportunity again. I know in Miami that's difficult because the owner's a little wacky and the infrastructure there has been wacky for decades. You go to New England, maybe it's a different story. Here's a guy who could win a Super Bowl ring this year. He could be assistant coach of the year. So Brian Flores, Mike Vrabel will be some really interesting names, and I will throw Steve Spagnuolo in there as far as defensive-minded coaches who will probably get interviews, and we'll see if they're able to. I think the Dan Quinn success in Washington has made it so that it's okay. It's okay to A, hire a defensive coach, B, hire a retread, someone who succeeded elsewhere to a level. Quinn had gotten to the Super Bowl as Falcons head coach. And Spagnuolo has won Super Bowls as a coordinator. Mike Vrabel got to a AFC championship as the Titans head coach. I think what you're seeing from Flores, I imagine, and let's not forget Mike McCarthy until this year as a retread head coach in Dallas did not win a playoff game, but he's won 12 games a couple times, I think. So I think the idea of hiring an older retread is not as taboo as you started to see a few years ago when it was just young guy, young guy, young guy. So I imagine that Vrabel, Flores, and Spagnuolo will get some interviews and maybe get some really serious looks if there winds up being especially 7, 8, 9 head coaching openings. All right, the games, like I mentioned, the Browns at the Ravens Saturday, 4:30. Browns are 17.5 point underdogs in Baltimore. And you know what? It's probably fair. The Browns might be starting Bailey Zappi at quarterback, if not DTR. Neither guy is very good. The Ravens, I mentioned, have a lot to play for. They want to wrap up the AFC North. They want to wrap up the three seed. Could they win this game by 30? Absolutely. I mean, the way they just waxed the Texans, they certainly can do the same to the Browns. So 17 and a half seems like a very fair line. I don't know if they'll cover it, but it just certainly seems fair. The 8 o'clock game on Saturday, Bengals at Steelers. Now, the Steelers have not played great football lately. They got to really watch it because, again, if they lose and the Chargers win and the Ravens win, then the Steelers are going to drop down. The Steelers get the 5 seed. They're going to feel good about going to Houston for the 4 seed. Steelers get leapfrogged by the Chargers, and then the 6 seed. Well, now you got to think about going to the Ravens, right? And I don't know if the Steelers want to go to Baltimore. I mean, they're not afraid of Baltimore. They've beaten Baltimore this year. But if you gave them their choice, you want to go to Baltimore, you want to go to Houston, I'm sure they would take Houston at this point. So the Steelers really got to win that game. And of course, we know it's do or die for the Bengals, who also need help. Whatever happens, if the Bengals don't make it, you're going to look back at this season and think the Bengals are not far away. Joe Burrow can play at a really high level. Higgins, maybe he leaves. We'll see. He's a free agent. Chase will be there. Gesicki will probably be back. They got to fix the defense, no doubt. They got to fix the offensive line. Some of the offensive linemen they have are decent. They just have to grow, like Amarius Mims. But you will look at the Bengals going into next year if they make some necessary moves as a real Super Bowl contender. Shoot, we thought that this year didn't happen, but the way they finished, and especially if they can beat the Steelers, and even if they don't make the playoffs, you'll think very highly of the Bengals going into next year. The Sunday games, the Panthers at the Falcons. The Falcons are 8.5-point favorites. The Falcons shot themselves in the foot. Kyle Pitts dropped a huge pass against the Commanders, but they gave the Commanders everything they had. The Commanders just had a little bit more. Unfortunately, that probably means the Falcons are going to come up short. But I think you had to like what you see from Michael Penix. So they will have that to build on in the offseason. They've got to get pass rushers. Got to do better on defense with the pass rush. Other than that, and maybe getting a little bit more, one more offensive weapon, maybe a tight end who can block and catch, as opposed to one who just catches passes and then drop one at a crucial moment. But the Falcons can be legit next year with Penix at quarterback. Commanders are Cowboys. Commanders are playing on another level right now. They're going to want to maintain that 6 seed, not lose it and go to the 7 seed, the Packers, because that means that they would have to go play the Eagles in the first round. Right now, they're sitting at the 6 seed, and you'd have to go to the Rams, the 3 seed. And I think the Commanders would much rather be able to do that. So they're going to put everything they got into this game. Jaden Daniels has been unbelievable. The Cowboys are playing it out, so I expect the Commanders to win the game and pretty easily. Bears at Packers. The Packers are 9.5-point favorites. Same thing here. Packers want to win this game. They want to hope the Commanders lose. They're playing at the same time. So then the Packers can get out of that 7 seed and get to the 6 seed. I'm sure the Packers would rather play on the road against the Rams than on the road against the Eagles. Texans at Titans. The Titans are a point favorite, which just shows you, I mean, obviously the Texans have nothing to play for, so they're playing backups, but the Texans have not finished the season well. I expect in a week from now, they'll be losers in the first round and hitting the golf courses. Meanwhile, the Titans, they got a lot of work to do. They need to get themselves a quarterback. Jags at Colts. Colts are 5-point favorites. Now, the weird thing is the Jags have already beaten the Colts, and the Colts are in complete turmoil and have been eliminated. So the Jags, I don't know that the Jags have anything to play for, but I'm not sure what makes the Colts 5-point favorites in this game. I feel like the Jags beat the Colts pretty often throughout the years. They've always seemed to win a game against the Colts. So that'll be an interesting one. The Bills, 3-point favorites against the Patriots. The Bills are trying to finish this thing out. They've already got the number 1 seed. Trubisky will start for the Bills. We'll see if May starts for the Patriots. I imagine if he's healthy, he'll be able to play. And the Patriots are really just getting themselves geared up to become, the Bills are getting themselves geared up to finally break the streak and become Super Bowl champions. Got a long road ahead though. Giants at Eagles. Now we'll talk about a little bit about this game on the pregame show Sunday morning. Myself Adam Kaplan and Greg Cosell. As I sit here today and do this show, I have to admit, I'm a little shocked that the Eagles are 3-point favorites when the world knows because they've already come out and said they're resting their starters. I understand the Giants are a terrible organization. They did just score 31 points and beat a Colts team that had a lot to play for. They still do have Malik Neighbors. Drew Lock has started games in this league, whereas Tanner McKee is a third string quarterback making his NFL starting debut. He's only thrown 4 passes in the NFL, and he's going to be doing it behind a backup offensive line with the receivers named Anais Smith and Johnny Wilson and EJ Jenkins at tight end. I am shocked that the Eagles are 3-point favorites. I don't know what to make of that game, but clearly odds makers think the Giants, the Giants starters cannot beat the Eagles backups. And, if you're John Mara and you're looking at that, how are you not making some type of change? The Saints at the Bucks are, this is another amazing line. There are some unbelievable spreads this week. The Bucks are 13.5-point favorites over the Saints at home in an NFC South game. The Bucks, I believe, will win this game. I don't know if they'll cover. They've been a little sporadic lately. I know they just had a huge win last week in a game that they had to win, and it helped get them back in the first place. They beat the Panthers 48-14. 2 weeks ago, they lost to the Cowboys 26-24. The week before that, they beat the Chargers 40-17. They are a very unpredictable team. They will beat the Saints, but I don't know if they'll beat them by 13.5. The Saints lost to the Raiders last week, and they're not good at all, but they try. I mean, they try a lot harder now under Darren Rizzi than they were in the middle of the year under Dennis Allen. Do they want to come in here and try to play spoiler? I don't know. There's no love lost for the Saints and Falcons either, but I think the Saints are going to give the Bucks everything they got. But I do expect the Bucks will win. Just got to make sure it's going to be a huge game, I'm sure, for Bucky Irving, who has been a real find for the Tampa Bay offense. And Baker Mayfield just has to protect the ball, and they'll be fine. The 4 o'clock games, you got the Chiefs and Broncos. I already talked about it. The Broncos are 10.5-point favorites. So no pressure, Denver. You got everything to lose, and you have something to gain, obviously, in keeping your 7th seed. But remember, you don't have to. The Broncos don't have to win, but they sure can end any speculation just by beating the Chiefs and making sure they secure that number 7 seed. The Chargers, 6.5-point favorites at the Raiders. Again, the Chargers, depending how things shake out, can improve their seeding. They can get to the 5, so likely to give it their best against the Raiders. They're clearly a better team than the Raiders, and it wouldn't surprise me if this thing was way more than a 6-point outcome at the end. Seahawks at Rams, meaningless game for both teams. Seahawks are 5.5-point favorites, so I'm sure teams will be resting. Guys won't be playing too much. The Seahawks can be a good team next year. They got to get better defensively, and they got to get better on the offensive line. They do those two things, the Seahawks will be every bit the contender in the NFC West next year, and it'll be another fun year for that division. Dolphin and for the Rams, this is an interesting playoff that the Rams. We'll talk about it next week, but obviously you don't know how many years Matthew Stafford has left. Cooper Kupp just hasn't been the same. Nakua and Kyron Williams have been their offense. Their defense is young, so you wonder if this is sort of the last window for the Stafford Cooper Kupp offense here before things change going forward. I already talked about Dolphins Jets. Dolphins are 1.5-point favorites, but with Tyler, at least Tyler Huntley is a pro quarterback. He's won games. He's better than what the Dolphins had earlier this year when they were playing other guys as their backup. The Jets, I imagine, will come in and try to put up a fight. I think Aaron Rodgers wants to go out on a good note. He's been clicking with Devontae Adams. It would be nice if he also clicked with Garrett Wilson. Much is being made about that relationship. But again, I can't repeat how strange it is that the Dolphins are not eliminated, have a small chance to make to the postseason, and yet their playoff hopes rest on beating the Jets with Tyler Huntley and not Tua Tagovailoa. It's been a crazy year for that organization. The Niners are at the Cards. Cards 4-point favorites. These are two teams that need to do a lot of work in the offseason to improve. Niners, it's more about getting healthy and getting deeper again on defense. They really need to probably make some free agent signings. They'll have to figure out their contract situation with Brock Purdy. I imagine they will, and he'll be back as their quarterback. They should be good next year if they make the necessary changes. The Cardinals, to me, they've improved a lot this year, but I don't know. I don't know if they're the type of team that's going to keep climbing and climbing and climbing. I think they have questions about their quarterback. I think they have questions about their offensive line. I think they have questions about their defense. They have more to fix and more to really understand about themselves than the Niners do. But they could, if the Cards make the right moves, they could be right in it for the NFC West again next year. And of course, Vikings at Lions. The Lions are 3-point favorites. Will not surprise me if the Lions win. I'm feeling like the Vikings right now have the momentum, have the health, have Darnold playing at a high level, have the defense playing at a high level, and they're catching the Lions at a really good time. Uh, but you know what? The Lions seem like when they need a score, they can get a score. So I think this game is going to be a shootout. As for my three picks against the spread last week, I went 2-1. That makes me 30-21 on the season. I took the Chargers covering the 4.5 that they were giving the Patriots. They won by 33, so I was right on that. I had the Commanders -5 over the Falcons. They covered by winning by 6 in the overtime touchdown. I did lose on the Rams. I had the Rams giving 5.5 to the Cardinals. They won by 4. So that was my loss. So I went 2-1. This week, I felt like there were a bunch of games I felt confident about. I'm going to take the Falcons and the 8.5 over the Panthers. Panthers are pretty banged up. They really took it on the chin last week against the Bucks. I know they've played hard in a lot of games this year and lost some tough ones, but I think the injuries are starting to impact them. And the Falcons, again, have something to play for. They're playing at the same time as Tampa. And they're also, forget that, they're also, trying to get Michael Penix groomed up and get him experience and get him throwing the ball and, get ready for next year with Michael Penix at the helm. So I liked what I saw from Penix. I think they cover the 8.5. It's a big number. Really got to win probably obviously by 10 more likely. If they can win by 9, we'll see. But they'll cover it. I like the Commanders 4.5 over the Cowboys because the Commanders are looking very, very tough lately. The quarterback is making problems for everybody. The Cowboys basically gave up after they fell behind against the Eagles. I'm not sure they're fighting that hard for McCarthy anymore. Had injuries, offense and defense, backup quarterback. So the Commanders, to me, win this game fairly easily. Plus, the Commanders lost to the Cowboys. Was that over Thanksgiving weekend in a really fluky fashion. I think that not only do they want to win for their seeding, but also to prove to Dallas that they're the better team. And give me the Chargers with -6 over the Raiders. The Chargers are tough, man. Defensively, they're tough, and offensively, they're coming along there with Justin Herbert. So I like the Chargers to cover the 6 that they're giving the Raiders. So those are my three picks. It's going to be a wonderful last final week of the NFL regular season, and we'll keep doing this show all throughout the postseason. Thanks to everybody who has watched and listened all season long. And like I always say, enjoy your football this weekend.